Hey guys, welcome back. This is Tom from the Progressive Mind Center podcast. Thanks as always for joining us. I have a special guest with me. This is my good friend, a vet, an ordained chaplain, a colleague, somebody that we went to school together. And I have him here today, and I'm very, very excited to have him, Mr. Michael Wright. So he's going to share some of his thoughts and feelings and some of the things he's observed being out there in the field working with guys and gals and helping primarily in the field of addictions. And so Michael's here today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Tom. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man. So we were talking before, and we're kind of bouncing some things, some ideas over what we're going to have as a topic for today's show, and we're just going to kind of have a conversation about some things that we've observed. But some things you were sharing with me, just let's go ahead and let's just jump into it and start sharing for our community and for our folks listening.
Sure, for sure.
So, what kinds of things have you been observing, and in particular, maybe even related to the stress being felt due to the coronavirus, and maybe even protests that are happening, and maybe just the political arena? Not that we have to go too far into that, but as it relates to the people that you serve.
Well, the population that I serve is primarily recovering addicts in different genres of society, facets, if you will. And so it's very significant, that question is because you observe an increased or elevated anxiety, as I see it, and they come in, and that's exacerbated obviously in the addiction world with something that they use to self-medicate with, i.e. heroin, fentanyl. As you know, that's pretty elevated in these days, and it's a nationwide. Cocaine, things of this nature. So they come in there with that, and they're seeking answers. They don't always find. That's why they self-medicate. So that's among the things that I observed. Something that's very preoccupying and worrying, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. So, have you seen an increase in people abusing substances, and as it's related to the stress that's going on?
I think it was there all the way, but what the stress does is it exacerbates it to the point where they think that that type of escapism, albeit pseudo, is something that they feel more comfortable than actually facing life on life's terms, if you know what I mean. And I have seen that, yes, to answer your question. And so we try and deal with it as best we can. But you must note that this has been ongoing for a lot of different reasons, too many of which we can get into now. But there's traumatic issues, there's childhood issues, there's PTSD, trauma, so on and so forth. And so, as a psychotherapist like you are, like we both are, we see this happening. And then so there's a lot of solutions for it. But first, you have to get the person to realize that the path that they have chosen to go down, if you will, that is of addiction and these things, is something of self-destruction. It just takes a matter of time.
You ever find yourself getting frustrated?
Wow. Well, I what can I say? To me, the frustration comes when you try your best to do or to make the client understand that he doesn't have to live, he or she understand that he doesn't have to live that lifestyle, and then you find out that they can, yes, hit a death because they've done this several times in many cases, and they really don't care about themselves. I have found, maybe you have too, that you can't want sobriety more than the client themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
can only work so hard, but we can't get inside of them. I guess if we could, we would do that. But then how would they learn? And
Mm-hmm.
this is the frustrating point of, if you have to pinpoint it, would be that, because as I've said earlier, we kind of talked about this. I've seen 6 meet their demise that I can count since I've been in this field, and each one is a sad case from different ranges, from 19 to 37 or 38, and they're no longer on this earth because of kind of things what we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, think about it like this way. Imagine how much work it takes to be an addict, to be an alcoholic. I mean, and to still be able to function. And think about how you have to be cunning and baffling and smart, um, equally as cunning as the disease is itself. So it's not that the person is incapable of having a better life, or
Yeah.
or quitting, or becoming sober. It's just that they are so smart that they can manipulate themselves into thinking that there's really no other way, that this is, and they don't realize how much of a slave they have become to their addiction and to whatever the substances are.
Or they realize it, but they find frustration in getting out of that slavery, if you will, of addiction that they found themselves in. So I do agree with that. But why can't we turn that around and let them use that same energy towards their sobriety? That's what I think all therapists nationwide try and do that, or at least have that inclination to try and want to do that, because you do have to spend a lot of energy to do that. I agree with you. You do have to understand that to get it over on your parents or your wife or your husband, and put up a facade that everything's going right when you know in your heart that it's not. It takes a lot of person to do it. Look at all that energy you're expending. So why not use at least half of that energy? Understand that it's a fruitless road that you're going down to use it. Well, we as vets, you're Marine, my Air Force and Army, and so we have to use energy for the right purpose in the defense of the country, the patriotism, all that stuff. So we're kind of knowing on that, but I do know that I understand that it was a fruit produced, the results that we saw in our soldiers or airmen or Marines or Coasties or whatever. You had that and you were proud of that. At least I was, when I was in training the soldiers doing that. So it produced something. Here, in contrast, all that energy produces negativity. It produces broken hearts, burnt bridges, and on it can go.
Well, excuse me. I was kind of thinking, and this is how I relate to the clients that I have in the office when they have an addiction. I say, you know what? It works. And they're like, no, it doesn't work. It makes all this bad crap happen to me. I said, no, you wouldn't do it if it didn't work.
Yes.
And this is the problem. This is the fundamental problem, is because alcohol, drugs, whatever your poison is, it probably works better than anything else that you could use at the time. Exactly. Until you start developing some more healthy, positive, ways to kind of cope with whatever it is that you're coping with. But it works. There's so many positives for you. At least your mind attaches to all these positive things. Your subconscious mind in particular. Your conscious mind is saying, oh, I don't like doing this. This is not making me feel good. I'm losing money. This is going to eventually kill me. I'm losing my family, my wife, my husband, my kids, my house, whatever.
Yes.
But the subconscious mind is saying, I like this. This changes how I feel. This makes me feel good. And 88% of our motivations and desires is led by our subconscious mind, not our conscious mind. And when the conscious mind gets overloaded, it diverts right into the subconscious mind, which is where all of our comforts are, all of our knowns. So if we in our subconscious mind know that alcohol, for example, is going to help relieve my stress and anxiety, it's going to instantly change how I feel, or drugs, fill in the blank, then in the morning, it's easy to be sober, but at 11:30 at night, not as easy.
Well, you see that. It's interesting because it's the chemical release of the dopamine at a certain instance that is produced by the drugs, depending on which drug you're taking to do it. And so it's an instantaneous, at least a very quick response chemically that they say is their high. And because of that, you study the mind, the frontal lobe and all of these things that we do, then you'll see what it happens. And they want to, well, when we bring them back, if you will, not that we do, when they finally realize that pretty much what you said is true, that there is a high to it. But when we talk with them and they see that, now that same release of that chemical element of it comes naturally, and that takes a while. That's where the anxiety comes in, irritableness, downright anger outbursts, which we've witnessed before, throwing chairs, smashing things, having to pull a button to have someone come in to help them because of this. It's not easy. So what they've done is they've accustomed their bodies to getting instant releases, and then after that, they're always chasing their high, whether it's in heroin or cocaine or, keep it up. And, alcohol is a depressant, as you know. So they'll do that. And you ask them why, and they're not really sure. But the stories of just destroyed lives are more than we can say at this point. But that's what it is, and so it's bringing them back from that precipice, if you will, and letting them understand that your body will reduce these things. And if you're a type A personality, for instance, you can still be a type A personality, but do it in a positive way. I told one guy today, he says, I don't mean to go on and on about it, but
That's
I,
all good, man.
I told one guy today, I says, listen, but, and he was telling his father this, this particular person is in his 20s. And I said, he was saying to his father, he said, I just like the rush. You don't understand. It's not all that. It's the rush I get. And his father responded, the rush forget of what? For trying to run from the law to do these things? what,
Yeah.
what is rush that you're talking about? And he couldn't say. I says, well, if that's the case, and you come with me. Next time we're up at 12,000, you bail out with me. You talk about a rush, you're going to get one. And his
Yeah.
father laughed at that because he could relate to that. And the kid never really thought about that before. I says, you can get it in a lot of different ways. It just doesn't have to be destructive, is my point.
Mhm. Well, Michael, what kind of interventions are you currently using that you found to be effective for helping to treat?
Well, the old standard for the alcohol, obviously, is the CBT. Solution focused brief therapy. That seems to be effective. You have Adlerian theories and sundry theories that you can be eclectic when you're dealing with different clients, but for the most part, I take it on an individual basis. I also have the thought that since each individual is different, I use a little portion of all of that works. But there's DBT. Of course, there's also the possibility of, and we have other colleagues that do this better than I do. The mind, where they take them to relax in a certain format,
Mm-hmm.
and they do that. So there's a lot of available things that we can do, or um, how would you say, just ways we can actually help them. Those are the
Right.
theories those are the methods that we use for the most part to do that, but we're not limited to that.
So you found that being an eclectic type of therapist, utilizing cognitive behavioral therapy, solution-focused brief therapy, uh, dialectic behavioral therapy, and some mindfulness relaxation,
Mm-hmm.
and others you had mentioned, an Adlerian approach and looking at family systems and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you were kind of alluding to the fact that maybe it's specific to the client that or the patient or
Mm-hmm.
whatever is going to work with them, whatever they're going to glom onto,
Mm-hmm.
and you may begin using like motivational interviewing and just kind of see where they're at, and then kind of go from there, see what makes sense to them, and you can kind of hand pick or hen pick your modality that's
Mm-hmm.
going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And now before we started rolling, I know you had talked as a chaplain, you bring faith and spirituality and things like that into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just curious on how you utilize that to help people with addictions, and how that has been successful.
Thank you for asking. And yes, motivation viewing, which I didn't mention, but of course that's almost one of the staples along with the others that we use as we begin to. But with regards to the spirituality portion of it, I find that the majority of that comes, whether it's CA, NA, AA, or AAA. No, just kidding. But I find that they'll come in there and they'll know that. Well, you know that Bill, and back in 1935 and then 39 was
Mm-hmm.
alluding to the 12 steps. I think that was a bleed over from some type of spiritual experience that he had. I'm just summarizing briefly what seems to be the case. And so he tried to incorporate that in those 12 steps. I find that they know that very well. What I find, though, and I can bring in the spiritual portion, is that they're looking for something above and beyond themselves because they have tried it themselves and it doesn't work. That's where my gospel training, and as an ordained chaplain who's gone into prisons and jails for many, many years now, over 20, I find that it brings comfort and relief to the stress factor of the fact that their frustration, and they're like in a revolving door syndrome, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
When I talk about God and how he personalizes his relationship with the person, and how they've tried and failed through different means, whether it's drugs, sex, etc., and they still feel the void of frustration, I say, well, why not give God a chance? Why not give Jesus a chance and see if that works? And a lot of them, from their childhood training or whatever the experience that they have, they return to that, and I've seen good success stories because of that.
Oh, nice. So I think just the work that you do with addictions and with psychotherapy, and you're seeing the same kind of volume. You're doing the same type of work, regardless of what's going on in the world right now or what's going on in our country. It's you're still sort of fighting the good fight, I guess.
Well, yeah, but it's a never-ending fight, and as you know, that you can get tired at times, but you have to see what your own motivation is to do it. I find that self-care is an anomaly for many of therapists because they, well-intentioned as they may be, don't do it. And I find that
Self-care, what's that? No, I'm yeah.
that burnout factor, my goodness.
Compassion fatigue.
Yeah, that they do that. And you're all gun ho when you get out there, like how we were when we graduated, and a thing like that, and you want to do the right thing, but nobody knows. It's not written in the book per se how it's supposed to go. You never know. You have to go and make your own path, and that's what we've done. But I find that is something that has to be at the forefront of what we do, because if you're empty yourself, you can't give to others.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why you have to do it. So you have to balance everything. With the onset, you mentioned that earlier, of the COVID-19 and this unexpected results that you have, people are on edge, and they get not they're in the house all the time, so they get antsy, and they want to go out and do things. They don't like the infringement of what they perceive to be the government mandates in their lives, and yet, for the safety of their own families and the society and neighborhood and the society in general, they try and do that. Most folks will conform to that.
Yeah.
And that's coming into our addiction. And I'm sure you've seen that to the point too. Then you have the protests, as you mentioned earlier, and things like that, which is of recent, but it's been simmering for a long time. So all of these factors you have to deal with as you go through that. And they need therapists like ourselves. Social workers, licensed social workers like yourself are very much in need. And this is something that I think is a blessing in any neighborhood or society if it's used correctly.
Yeah. So I was just wondering if there's been an increase because people are being, quarantined or sort of encouraged to stay home to limit the exposure, and to wear masks and things like that. And the podcast I had before, we're kind of being real and talking about, the masks and, sort of our civil rights or our civil liberties potentially being affected. And not that the mask or being told to wear a mask was a huge thing, but it's sort of like, well, if we let that slide, then what comes next after that?
Yeah.
So we're just wondering, people being at home, I mean, if you are new in sobriety and, you've got maybe 6 months or a year under your belt, you're going to meetings, and then suddenly this virus comes up, you're not allowed, you can't go to meetings. Mm-hmm. Maybe you can do some stuff online, but it's not the same.
No, it's not.
Maybe you can talk on the phone, but then you're faced with, I'm bored, I'm scared, I'm stressed. Well, and you go to those things that work. Remember, like we were talking, drugs and alcohol, they work. They help reduce that stress and anxiety. So I was just wondering about, go ahead. You had a thought.
Albeit temporarily. They never work, but in the interim, they work. And exactly how you said it. So, they get antsy. They don't like the quarantine, but at the same time, and they default. I can't tell you, and I have to say this. The recovery rate in addiction is abysmal. It just, there's no other way to say it.
To begin with.
Yeah, to begin with. It's abysmal. If you get 22 to 25%, that's stretching it. Mm-hmm. And I see this constantly. They come back. And mind you, these clients, and I guess I could say nationwide, but I know regionally wide, they say the right things they're going to do it. And I believe that they have every good intention to do it. But it's a compulsive behavior, Tom.
Yeah.
And they don't take that in consideration. So if it's psychological, it has to be attacked and destabilized psychologically. Mm-hmm. I believe that. because it's coming. Because where do they get the inner strength for a person to stand up in 15 years clean, say he's been clean or she's been clean 15, 20 years, and all of the people that are listening to him admire him and their mouths open, they're saying, well, how did he do that? Or how did she do that? And they tell their stories of tragedy and triumph.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all through the change in the transformation, the metamorphosis, if you will, of the mind and the psyche to realize that you can do this and you don't have to go back into bondage of whatever type of addiction that you happen to have. So when you come to something like the being quarantined, and they get they're just want to get out and do something like that, and since they can't because they don't want to get in trouble with the law, they default to that. I think every week we have at least maybe 3 or 4 people that come back that said they never would. I have had at least, and they're not my particular clients, but I know that they've been Narcan,
Yeah.
because of their addiction. And I asked them a lot of times, do you have a death wish? And of
Right.
course they
Yeah.
and they deny it.
Yeah.
And yet indirectly they affirm that they do.
Mm-hmm.
Because they say answers such as, I just do it impulsively. I don't think about what I'm doing when I do it. I said, but I counter with it. Isn't that kind of dangerous? Because in one of these things or episodes, when you do that, the EMT might not get there in time, or whoever, and you might not come back.
Right. You might not come back.
So isn't that suicidal ideation? And they don't sell me. They don't deny it. So
Mm-hmm.
you have that type factor that's going on.
Well, like for those folks who go into treatment, in the treatment environment, of course, it's set up to be healing and therapeutic, and maybe even to dig or poke and prod at some of your insecurities or some of your issues. But also, you're surrounded by people that have similar issues. You work together. You have therapists, you have psychiatrists or doctors. You've got a whole cadre treatment team available to you.
Right.
You have activities to do. Of course, your substances are not there, although I know there are treatment centers where they sneak or figure out a way to get stuff in. But I mean, for the most part, you're clean off of it, and there's not a huge temptation. But then you're released and you feel great. You feel good. You're stoked. You're motivated. I'm going to take this on. And you go out back to the regular world, back to all of your triggers again, back to your families, back to the daily grind, back to pushing the boulder up the hill. And I think where you were talking about really the recidivism rate and how that's so low or higher, however you say that, I don't know, but people are not maintaining sobriety post-treatment. So.
I mean, I would be a liar if I said it was. I wish I could be more optimistic about it. And I do say that with a heavy heart, but I do know that when I see them coming back, my concern is that one of these times they won't come back. So yes, recidivism rate, I saw it when I go to the prisons, but that's different because that's a different genre altogether. When you're talking about the addicts and the free will, we try and prepare them about 2 to 3 weeks before they go out, saying this is nothing but a foundation that you and I are trying to build to the end that you can have enough to build upon it when you go out there back in the real world, because that's what they call it, quote unquote, the real world. And I understand what they mean, you do too. But the thing is that that's the world that you left. So if you're in a gutter, you were couch surfing, you were homeless, and you're trying to tell me that you don't want to go back to that because of the way you steal or stole or took money or whatever it is that you did in order to get your drugs, your crack cocaine, whatever you were doing, and you don't want to do that anymore, then that means to say that you have to make that your motivation to turn this around. Because quite honestly, we as psychotherapists don't have the answers. The clients themselves have the answers. You have to pull it out of them, though. They don't believe they're doing it. They self-abase. They've got great remorse, regret, guilt, shame, and on it goes. And so when you get them, that's what you get. You got a person, girl or male and female, that's looking down, won't even look in the eyes, shamed of what they did. She might have, or he might have prostituted themselves or whatever in order to get that. That shows you the power of whatever is that substance that you've been using.
Yeah.
It does. And so we've got to try and bring them back in an amount of time. And imagine trying doing that in just 30 days. It's
Right.
it's
Yeah.
and so we don't make any pretenses about it. We say this is just a foundation we're building. It's not a magic pill.
Here's another thought. And the people you were speaking about, almost like the severe, most severe cases. When you think about somebody who is um, uh, somebody shooting up in an alley behind a dumpster,
Mm-hmm.
That's somebody needs to help them. They need some serious help. They need recovery. They
Mm-hmm.
need, spirituality or faith or AA meetings or all the
Sure.
above. And they need detox, and they need, where they're out there prostituting themselves to make money, or they're stealing, and that. But we can identify that person is indeed an addict and they need serious help. But what about the person who, drinks daily
Mm-hmm.
and still has a job, still
Mm-hmm.
has a family? The
Mm-hmm.
family's not doing well, but they look at these other people and they're like, yeah, those people need help. I don't really need help. Like, I don't link myself with that. So they haven't hit rock bottom. I guess
Right.
that's
There
another
you go.
term that
There
we
you go.
throw around in
Yeah.
addictions. Haven't hit rock bottom, but
Uh,
you don't have to wait until you get to that level of being in the alley and prostituting yourself, or just wondering when your next fix is going to come or how you're going to get it, or being in a trap house, or
mhm.
doing things you wouldn't necessarily
Normally
want to
do.
do.
Well, you hit it on the head. The thing is that when I get that type of client, it becomes that much more tougher because they have used that energy, as we alluded to earlier, to do everything that a society expects them to do. The problem is that materialistically, they may be doing well, but emotionally, they're doing horrible. And it's hard for him or her to admit that. I'll give you a general, for instance. There was this guy who had a high school education, and he came to me because they dropped off, not where I'm working currently, but they dropped him off literally, and the van pushed him out of the van. He was a CEO. He had at least 50 employees under him. They came out there, they deceived him because
they
he had
they black bagged them and kicked him.
they pushed the guy out. Get out. So he was mad at first that they did that because they told him it was going to, they put a ruse and they told him it was going to be another thing. It wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
They did out of concern, the fact that seeing him as a CEO over this company, he was going on a path that he couldn't return to. His wife happened to speak Spanish, and I speak Spanish, so I talked with her, and she told me what her concern was. So when I got him there, he said that everywhere I go, whether it's Japan or China or Thailand, they love their liquor, their hardcore drinks, and it's
Mm-hmm.
an offense to them if you don't take it. So, I always have been so used to, and wine is what gets me. That's what his was wine.
Yeah.
So within 30 days, we had to try and deal with that dynamics that he's doing good. He's meeting all this. He's at a beautiful home. Of course, you can imagine if you got 50 employees, he's doing well, and he was doing that, but that was his problem. But you know what? The interesting thing about that is that after the end of, and I'm not saying that 30 days is a magic of 45 or 60. That's a myth. That's not true. But what I'm saying, at the end of, there was an enlightenment, if you will, in him. There was an awareness that he hadn't before. And he absolutely was disgusted at the behaviors that he exemplified for his family and everything, being a man of over 50. He was doing that. So I guess the silver lining of that was that he was so excited at that time for it, that there was another person in the treatment center with him who was struggling, a younger fella, about from 27 or so, younger fella. And he said, if you'll do kind of what I did and show that you're sincere about this recovery, he was moving, I can say this, from Louisiana, but he was going to go back and get his truck and come down. And he offered him a job and he said, I'll give you a job. And it paid a lot more than what he did. That young man did that, and he kept his word, that CEO, and he went to the place and he went down there. So there's like a silver lining, if you will, of a lot of these stories. You don't see it very often, but he was doing that. So it can be done, but those are the hardest type that you think. I've had a CEO. That means that on Wall Street, he was the boss of those that are screaming and yelling on Wall Street. I kid you not. I had him. He came to me 3 times. So this is general, nobody knows.
Buy,
But
sell, buy, sell.
well, he was their boss. He was the one
Yeah.
and he had a problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's hard to do that. So that's a hard nut to crack, but it can be cracked.
Well, I have a couple other questions for you. And maybe this isn't the right wording, but like, what are maybe some keystones or some tenets for those who are in recovery? Some things that, if you do these things,
Mhm.
or if you watch out for these things,
Mhm.
you'll have success in recovery.
Excellent question. So I would start with one by inner conviction. I would say that would be one, that they have inner conviction that the path that they're going down, if you will, just a phraseology, is not the path that's going to lead to anything conducive to what they themselves say they desire. So it's got to be that inner conviction. Two, motivation. So I say, what is your external motivation and what is your internal motivation? I've had responses like my wife, my dog, my family, my daughter, so on and so forth. That's external. I say, what about internal? You know what they tell me? Fear of death. I'm going to wind up forever a crackhead in some alley, like you said, that will never get out of that. That terrifies me. They brought themselves down to those depths where it's just, they say fear of death. Then all of them say not suicidality, but they say the fact that I want to prove to myself that I can be a decent and productive member of society. That's
Mhm.
another motivation. So two is motivation. Three, the thing to watch out for is complacency, because in more than 85% of the cases that I can recall, they were doing well. And that's not just limited to the addictive field. You can go expand that to any type of field. And pretty much collectively, it would be said that complacency breeds the things that come after that, because you stop doing what has worked for so long.
Yeah.
So I would be careful that they don't allow complacency to deviate them from their short or long-term goals that they've established, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess the last thing that I would say is vigilance. Vigilance over your process, whatever process that you've chosen to do that. Be vigilant about it and have outside or external objectivity.
Mhm.
In other words, accountability from someone else, whether it's AA, NA, your permanent sponsor, your home group, your wife, your uncle, your Celebrate Recovery, that's the Christian track, and your pastor, whoever it might be, your imam or your rabbi, whoever it might be, have that external accountability so you can go on and continue to be strong.
I was also thinking, how about for the loved ones, friends, family members of those of an alcoholic or an addict, whether they've identified as being that way or not?
Mhm.
What are some things, some ways that you could educate, or some things that they can do themselves to help?
Mhm. I would say be aware of the signs of relapse for your loved one. Now, here's a dynamic that you may not have thought about. You say that and it can work. But what do you understand total sobriety to mean? Well, for most folks, it means just that. They can't touch that substance anymore forever. Now, you can say that to a 60-year-old man and he might understand that. You can't say that to a 20-year-old kid and expect him to take you seriously. What? Are you kidding me? I can't have another beer? No way, man. You're out of your mind. You
Right.
know. And so the family members of this person, if they go back to an environment where even though they have been cleaned, the loved ones in that family aren't willing to stop, that's where the dilemma comes in. And we see that all the time, Tom. And so what it's a dynamic where they can't move geographically because financially it's impossible. So all they have to do is rely on people that can give them the understanding. And oftentimes it's not the family, unfortunately, because those are the ones that exacerbate. Or if you have a problem where there was childhood or adolescence trauma going on, PTSD, etc., and they have been the exacerbators or at least the catalyst of it, they don't want to go back home.
Yeah.
Now I'm putting the worst case scenarios out there, but you have these lovely family members that have been there for them through thick and thin, having their goods stolen or whatever, and they're still sticking by them. We have to, psychotherapists, instill in them the fact that you cannot continue to depreciate these people who have been there for you, because you'll turn around one day and they won't be there because they're just tired of it. They can't stand it anymore. You've heard of tough love, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've seen that in mothers and fathers when they leave them in jail and they don't come back and do that. And I've seen the opposite. I've seen horrible enabling parents that just go and rescue little Johnny or little Susie whenever they do. And you know what that does
Right.
for them, Tom? It leads the path to their eventual destruction. And I've seen that in real
Yeah.
time, you know. And so hopefully this answers your question. But those family members can be aware of the signs of relapse. That's what I tell them all the time. Know what to do and make them accountable, especially if they're coming under your roof to live. You know, it's not that you're going to be a Gestapo, if you will, but you've got to make them accountable to the fact that this is their life and you're included, and wittingly or unwittingly, in that life. And so if you keep them kind of focused on what they have to do for their short and long term goals, that's where families can kind of course, love and compassion. But they've been doing that for years and it hadn't worked.
Yeah.
Because addicts are manipulators, and they'll tell you that themselves. No, I know I'm manipulating. I know what to say. I
Mm-hmm.
should do that. So families
Yeah.
oftentimes aren't the best. It's got to be an objective person that could let them know and give them accountability and call them out on their stuff, as they say,
Yeah.
in recovery, and just not have no hairs in the tongue, as we say, pelo en la lengua, to do that and understand that works best for families.
So like having a sponsor is kind of an important thing, somebody that can hold you accountable
That's
for
right.
your stuff, so to speak, where the family members may not be able to see it, or they may be prone to being manipulated.
That's right. That's right.
And you talked about enabling behaviors, and we know that the family is not purposely trying to enable them to continue those behaviors, but they're doing it out of love, out of compassion, out of
concern.
I want to make sure that my family member, my child, whatever, has everything that they need so that they can succeed. And they do this again and again and again and again, and yet it's providing the opposite effect.
Exactly. That's why a beautiful 19-year-old kid is no longer on this earth. Just speaking in general terms, she was from New England, and it's a sad case. And her dad, I guess, because watch this, 5 times a week, 5 times a day. Sometimes she would change her dress while she was in treatment and recovery. And she'd say, "Michael, how do I look now?" And I just kind of fake like I had a camera, and she'd smile. And she wasn't my client, but she'd do that. So that spoke to me of a mental health issue that she had: low self-esteem, wanting to call attention to yourself. That's something that has nothing to do with the drugs. But what it is when you have an altered state of mind, whatever that drugs that you're ingesting makes you that much bolder or extroverted if you were introverted.
Right.
And that's what happens, and that happened. So she was used to manipulating little daddy because that's daddy's little girl, gorgeous girl, I have to say that, but she did that. And so what happened was she asked for a one-way ticket home. One more time, daddy granted that. And I guess she was going to take a side trip before she got home. And unfortunately, that side trip was her demise. So you can imagine the broken heart of that father who will have to live with this the rest of his life.
Yeah.
For being manipulated, and the daughter who manipulated him as well to do that. I can't imagine. I wouldn't wish that on any parent. But those are some of the sad stories that we go through and we hear. And not only me, probably you get 1,000 from different therapists of more tragic stories like that, of the insidiousness of the behaviors that happen as a result of the addiction. Enabling. The mom doesn't want to, but they don't. It's my baby. It's this one. I understand that. But you have to go with tough love. Now, I'll say this and shut up. So, in my generation, I have to be, you wouldn't have got weight. If you smoked marijuana, and don't lie, everybody tried it. So everybody tried it. But it was curious about that. But you couldn't do things like that. Experimented, I mean, if they're honest, or let's say most, not everybody, but most. But so some people, if you watch the film, the video Pleasure Unwoven, um, he speaks about that, the pregenetic disposition, and how you can't get away from that. It's a very popular film among AA. But for me, I'm just thinking it just comes around down to choices. Now, when you're young, you don't know choices. So if daddy set you on a pedestal and gives you spiked eggnog during Christmas, and everybody's laughing, ha ha, look at that little Johnny. You don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
But you've opened up the door for him to, at 7 years old, try it again, and then 9. So you've done that. And it could have been a family of 5. Johnny and maybe Susie, out of other 3 kids, are the only one that like it. But now they've become, you've opened up, you've made that seed for them happen so that they can continue down that path. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
That happens. And so how do you pull them back from that? We see them 30, 40 years later.
Yeah.
Very regretful of the past, but they have sisters and brothers that never touched the stuff. They don't like it, and you see what happens. So you have that dynamic too.
Yeah. What are some final thoughts that you want to share with the audience?
Well, I'm very grateful that they tuned in and listened to you. I hope that the audience just goes, and I'm very grateful to be here with Tom, who's my dear friend, and I respect him a lot. I would just say that for the audience, that if you happen to be in that type of situation where you have addicts or you're dealing with recovering addicts, but be aware of what we said earlier, that you can be a help to them if you recognize the signs of their recovery and the signs of their relapse. And you don't want to coddle them, you don't want to make them flee, but you do have to establish boundaries, especially if these young people, or maybe not so young, are living with you, or even if they're not, your brother, your uncle, your aunt, your sister, your grandfather. We've had those too. You have to say these things, because I think it's critical given our society, and not only the pandemic with the coronavirus, but before that, fentanyl, heroin, and all of the other drugs that come along, because they're phases and they're fads that are killing our young people and not so young. I would say that first of all, promote healthiness, happiness, enjoyment with life itself, without the use or intervention of drugs. I mean, that they can face life on life's terms. You do it every day. I think they deserve a chance to do that sometime, but oftentimes, because of they're ostracized and they feel shame and guilt, like we mentioned earlier, they don't know to do that. So I would tell the audience that's listening, if you are sober, if you love your sobriety, you share it by being example, which I'm sure you are, many of you are already. But if you have a loved one that's in that type of situation, you just help him by recognizing that she and he can continue in their recovery with that emotional help. And hopefully it'll work out for you. I certainly pray that it does.
Well said. Michael, thank you for being here. It's always a good time when you come around. It's always good to see you. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule, time away from family, and to come and speak with our audience and to kind of help out. If you enjoyed the podcast, please feel free to subscribe and leave a review. Subscribing enables you to be open to receive notifications when there's a new episode out. And we hope that you guys leave some good reviews, so it helps us grow and improve. And if there's anything in particular that you'd like to hear about or have us discuss, please drop that in the reviews as well. So as always, a pleasure, you guys. Thanks so much. Take care, and we'll look forward to seeing you for the next one.
God bless.